Pay attention. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities at another event here to celebrate National Disabilities Awareness Week 2021. We are about to start our program, and I will invite you to bow your heads as we pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity for us to group together virtually and here in this space to discuss and to share information about matters concerning the community of persons with disabilities. We invite you in our presence to grant us wisdom, clarity of thought, and give us the ability to absorb this information to impart it to others. We thank you and we commit the activities for today in your hands. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Our first item on our program will be done by our Chief Technical Director, Ms. Dion Jennings, who will extend to you a warm welcome and her opening remarks. Please make her welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, Ms. Adrienne Pinnock. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those who are in this space and to those who are online. We are really happy to have you sharing with us this morning as we seek to ensure that all our partners are armed with the information, recalling the information that has been shared some time ago, and getting ready as we seek to implement the Disabilities Act. So on behalf of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Colette Roberts-Risden, our ministers, Honorable Carl Samudo, and the Minister of State, Honorable Xavier Main, it is my honor on their behalf to welcome you to this session. This session is very important to us because we are in this space to regain, refresh ourselves with the information as it relates to the Disabilities Act. This is an important piece of legislation that will seek to empower us and enable us to share this information with not only the persons who we serve, but to share it so that as a nation, we can become a people who understand and who continue to empower, protect, and promote the rights of persons with disabilities. Of course, in this pandemic, we recognize that there are challenges with this group of persons, this segment of the population. But we are not daunted. We will continue to serve. We will continue to ensure that our programs are inclusive and human-centered, and ensure also that we heighten the focus for persons with disabilities in our programs, in our policies, and in everything that we do. As part of this, we will be building the capacity of our institutions, both in the public sector as well as the disability sector organizations, ensuring that they are built up to serve the people who they're called to serve. As part of this building up, we have already developed codes of practice for healthcare and health facilities, employment, and education and training. And these will be approved by the new council, the Jcpd, a new Jcpd that will be established. And once these codes are approved, then they will become part of the guidance that will assist us in utilizing the practical guidelines to ensure that these rights are effected for persons with disabilities. So it is a time for partnership and collaboration. And we want to thank all the persons who are here this morning from representing the disability sector organizations, both the board members as well as the senior executives, as we seek to improve our knowledge and to ensure that we become part of this team that will champion the cause for persons with disabilities. You serve a very important people, and you too are called out and are special as you seek to give advice, support, and services to various persons with disabilities. And so we want to thank you for coming on board again with us, the Jcpd, as we seek to ensure that the information is shared and the information is utilized as we seek to help these persons to be the best that they can be. And so this morning, I want to give you the access key. As part of the access key, A is for advocacy. Having learned what you learned today, you will continue your advocacy role. C, care and compassion. You will continue to give care and compassion to the persons that you serve, understanding their needs and see how best you can deliver in assisting them. E is for effort. You are in this to exert all that you can to assist these persons. And as part of this effort, you will be empowering them to be the persons that they need to be, having the information that they need to be fully participating in the society. S is support. As disability sector partners, you provide critical support to persons with disabilities, and we want to encourage you to do that. And S is for sharing. You will share the knowledge that you get today so that you can continue to work with persons with disabilities and your organizations as well as with the Jcpd as we seek to advance the rights of persons with disabilities in our country. Thank you so much and have a good and a productive day.
I am sure we can do a little bit better than that. Thank you so much, Mrs. Jennings, for making us welcome and setting the stage for this most important discussion we have here today. Our next presenter comes from the Ministry of Labour and Social Security's Legal Department. She is Mrs. Janetta Smichael, our Senior Legal Officer, who will take us through the Disabilities Act 2014, chartering the course to equality of treatment for persons with disabilities. I encourage you to start taking notes as she speaks so that when we get to those discussion areas, we can have a robust interaction. Please make welcome Mrs. Janetta Smichael.
Good morning. Good morning to our partners who are online. Thank you all for having me. So we'll be looking today at the Disabilities Act and of course the regulations that was recently passed or affirmed in the Houses of Parliament. The Disabilities Act was passed in 2014. At that time, it also received the assent of the Governor General, and it speaks to promoting, protecting, and enhancing the full and equal enjoyment of persons with disabilities, of privileges, interests, benefits, and treatment on an equal basis with others in the society. The purpose of this presentation really is to examine some of the main provisions of the Act and to understand our rights and responsibilities under the Act. So we'll start with a brief background of the legislation. Are you hearing me? Okay. We'll begin with our background of the legislation. And the process to enact the Disabilities Act had its genesis in the establishment of a national policy for persons with a disability, and this occurred in 2000. The policy was adopted in keeping with the United Nations standard rules for the equalization of opportunities for persons with disabilities. The overall goal of the policy included improvement of the status and conditions of persons with disabilities, so they can enjoy a better quality of life in areas such as education, employment, health, housing, transportation, and accessibility to all areas of society. The national policy was debated and approved by the Houses in 2000, well, the House of Representatives in 2000 and the Senate in 2001. However, it was recognized that legislation was needed to give teeth to the policy, and this recognition resulted in the Act, which we will be examining today. So what are the objectives? They are set out in Section 3 of the Disabilities Act and are: 1, to reinforce and promote recognition and acceptance within Jamaica of the principle that a person with a disability has the same fundamental rights as any other person in Jamaica. 2, promote individual dignity and autonomy, including the freedom of choice and independence of a person with a disability. 3, ensure full and effective participation and inclusion in the society for persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. 4, prevent or prohibit discrimination against a person with a disability. And 5, promote respect for differences and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. So we look at some key terms that were used in the Act, and they were contained or comprised in Section 2. And the first one we'd look at is definition of access. Really, really important to what we are trying to achieve. And the Act defined it as, in relation to premises, includes freedom to enter in, approach, communicate with, make use of, or maneuver within any premises. The term also includes access to benefits and communication in relation to the capacity to receive and make use of the information. Another term, caregiver, and it refers to a parent, legal guardian, or any other person responsible for caring for the health, financial, physical security, and general well-being of a person with a disability. Discrimination, another very important term, and it means any distinction, exclusion, or restriction on the basis of disability, which has the purpose or effect of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal basis with others of privileges, legal interests, rights, benefits, and treatment in political, economic, social, cultural, religious, educational, or any other field, and includes all forms of discrimination, including denial of reasonable arrangements. Disproportionate or undue burden. The Act defines it to include the nature of the benefit likely to accrue to, or the detriment likely to be suffered by any person concerned, the effect of the disability on a person concerned, the financial circumstances of the person concerned who is claiming disproportionate and undue burden, the estimated amount of expenditure or other allocation of resources required by the person concerned who is claiming disproportionate or undue burden, and whether it is reasonably proportionate to the benefit likely to accrue. We utilize the term persons with disabilities on a daily basis, and that is defined under the Act to include a person who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment which may hinder his full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Just now you heard me use the term reasonable arrangements, and the Act also defined that term, and it refers to the necessary and appropriate modification and adjustments which are needed in a particular case to ensure to a person with a disability the enjoyment or exercise on an equal basis with others of privileges, interests, benefits, and treatment. And this includes the provision of auxiliary aids and services such as hearing devices, wheelchairs, prosthetic appliances, computer software, the use of interpreters, and taped audiovisual recorded texts. So let us move into looking at the establishment of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. So Section 5, and this is contained in Part 2 of the Act, it actually establishes the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, and it is to be established as a body corporate to which Section 28 of the Interpretation Act applies. The Act also sets out its function, and that will be addressed by Dr. Hendricks later on. But as a body corporate, the Jcpd, and this is a new Jcpd, it has certain functions, well, characteristics rather. And these include, it will acquire its own legal personality. So it will have a life of its own. It means that the Jcpd can be sued, or it may be sued in its own name. It may enter into contracts and in its corporate name as an individual would. It will have a seal and change it at its own will. Hold real estates in its own name. The Jcpd will regulate its own procedure and business, employs the staff necessary to perform its function. So as a body corporate, the Jcpd would be subject to the provisions of the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. And you can understand why it is a government entity despite having its own, able to carry out its own function. And the PBMA defines a statutory body, because that is what the Jcpd will be, as a body corporate established by an act of parliament over which the government or an agency of the government exercises control. As a body corporate, the Jcpd will, as a body corporate subject to the provisions of the PBMA, the Jcpd will be required to prepare and keep proper accounts and annual reports, which should be audited. Yes. Annual reports are to be submitted by the Jcpd to the Minister of Labour within 4 months after the end of each financial year, and the Minister is to transmit a copy of the report to and the annual statement of accounts to the Auditor General, and it is to refrain from exercising any borrowing powers without prior approval of the Minister of Finance. And this is all set out in Section 12 of the PBMA. And you will recall I indicated that the PBMA Act refers to the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. So it is also to refrain from negotiating to borrow money without approval of the Ministry of Finance. Since Dr. Hendricks will be looking at the functions, I will just move right in. The function of the Jcpd, I will move right into the Disabilities Rights Tribunal. And that body is established under Part 3 of the Act, the Disabilities Act. And the purpose of the tribunal is to hear complaints of aggrieved persons and settle same. The constitution of a tribunal and other matters related to the tribunal are set out in the 3rd schedule of the Act. And the tribunal is to consist of a chairman and its deputy chairman appointed by the Minister of Labour after consultation with stakeholders. There should be an attorney at law with at least 7 years experience. The minister is also required to appoint not less than 2 members to the tribunal from a panel supplied to him by organizations appearing to represent the disabled community. And these persons should possess sufficient knowledge of disability issues. At least one of the members should be a person with knowledge or experience in any one or more of the following fields. And they are listed on the board, and they include the quantity surveying, building or construction, economics, finance, accounting, human resource management. Of course, the tribunal will sit in divisions to hear complaints, and it will be headed by a chairman or a deputy chairman and 2 other members. So after considering a complaint, the Disabilities Rights Tribunal may make such order as it thinks fit. This is what the Act says. Some of the steps that can be taken by the Disabilities Rights Tribunal after hearing the complaints are issuing a declaration as to the rights of the respective parties. So the Disabilities Rights Tribunal is so authorized to issue a declaration as to the rights of the respective parties, to make an order for compensation to be paid to the complainant, to order that the respondent take such actions as appears to be reasonable for the purpose of removing or reducing the adverse effect on the complaint on any matter relating to the complaint. On the complainant on any matter relating to the complaint. The Disabilities Rights Tribunal may also encourage the parties to settle the matter by negotiation or conciliation. If the parties agree, the matter will be referred to the Jcpd for arrangements to be made for alternative dispute resolution. The Disabilities Rights Tribunal has the authority to issue an interim order at any time after the matter is referred to it by the Jcpd. The tribunal may order that the action being complained of cease or be reversed or not be carried out from the time it specifies. The order of the tribunal is final and conclusive and can only be challenged on a point of law in the Supreme Court. The Disabilities Rights Tribunal may apply to the Supreme Court where an individual or body corporate has failed to comply with its order. The court may order an offending party who is an individual to pay a penalty not exceeding $1 million. So we are hearing the monetary jurisdiction of the Disabilities Rights Tribunal. Additionally, an offending party who is a company or body corporate, they can be ordered to pay a penalty not exceeding $5 million. So what is it that the Act seeks to protect? We're looking now at the areas of protection. These are protection from discrimination, access to education and training, employment, political office and public life, healthcare and facilities, premises and housing, public passenger vehicles. We look firstly at discrimination, protection from discrimination. And that protection is set out in Part 4 of the Act. And Section 25 provides that a person with a disability shall not, by reason of such disability, be subject to any form of discrimination. You notice it is a very wide protection. The protection is against any form of discrimination. Access to education and training. This is treated in sections 26 to 28 of the Act. And Section 26 provides that an educational or training institution, whether public or private, is not permitted to deny a person with a disability from being enrolled at or attending the institution by virtue of their disability. The reason given by any institution cannot be that you are not allowed to have access based on your disability. That is a protection that the Act offers. Education or training institutions are to provide the support necessary to ensure that a person with a disability has the most reasonable access to the education or training provided and access to the facilities in the least restrictive environment and best suited to his individual needs. The student with a disability is not to be placed at a disadvantage as relates to student services. Reasonable arrangements are to be made, and the support required is to be provided. The caregiver of a person with a disability is to monitor the circumstances of persons under their care and file a complaint in respect of acts of discrimination with the Jcpd. And this provision is important. It means that our caregivers must monitor our children, monitor what is happening, and where it is that they recognize that there is no reasonable arrangement or there is any form of discrimination as it relates to access to education and training of the children, then the recourse is to lodge a complaint with the Jcpd. Educational or training institutions are to have regard to the provisions of any applicable code of practice. And you heard Mrs. Jennings spoke about codes of practices that have been prepared and to be adopted by the Jcpd when it is implemented. And this is the code of practice that is being referred here. Training examinations in relation to licensing or certification, whether for professional or trade purposes, are to be conducted in a place and manner and with facilities accessible to persons with disabilities. The Minister of Education is responsible for providing reasonable arrangements. That's very important. We need to know where it is, where to go to make our application or to bring our concerns if it is that our children will require reasonable arrangements. And the Ministry of Education really ought to facilitate the request. We will turn to employment. Section 29 through to 31 of the Act, the Disabilities Act, address that issue. An employer is prohibited under the Act from discriminating against a person with a disability who is otherwise qualified for the job in the terms of employment afforded to that person, that employee, in relation to the opportunities offered to the employee for promotion, transfer, training, or the receipt of any other benefit, by dismissing him or subjecting him by virtue of his ability to any other detriment without reasonable cause. So the employer is obliged to make reasonable arrangements for persons with disabilities to prevent disadvantage to the worker, to that person. So where the employee becomes disabled and is no longer capable of performing the task required by the contract of employment, the employer is required to redeploy the employee to a new position. And this is provided there is no undue or disproportionate burden. Recall that I started out with the definition of the term undue or disproportionate burden. However, the new position should suit the worker's current skill and abilities, and there should be no loss in remuneration and benefits. So let's look at political life and political office and public life. A person with a disability is not to be denied the opportunity to participate in programs, activities, or work that relate to political life. And this includes the opportunity to vote using procedures, facilities, materials, and support that are appropriate, accessible, and easy to understand. The opportunity to be elected to political life and perform public functions, and to be involved in the activities and administrations of political parties. Persons with disabilities are also not to be denied the opportunity to effectively and fully participate in the conduct of public affairs, including participation in civil society. Healthcare and facilities is another protection under the Act. And healthcare providers are required to provide healthcare without discrimination on the basis of a disability. They are also to provide access to general healthcare services and facilities to persons with disabilities. The minimum standard to be adhered to by health providers are actually set out in Section 35 of the Act, and include ensuring persons with disabilities have access to the same range and standard of affordable health services as is provided to other persons. Persons with disabilities provided with health services required because of their disabilities, including screening, early detection, treatment, and rehabilitation. Premises and housing. Persons with disabilities are to be granted access to premises and housing, and this is established by Section 33 through to 39 of the Disabilities Act. The Act, it made a distinction between existing premises and new premises, and it also addresses issues relating to alteration of leased premises. So we'll start out by looking at existing premises. The owner or agent of the owner of existing premises who intends to lease or rent the premises is required, if the person with a disability makes a request to make alterations to the premises and to make same accessible to and usable by a person with a disability. Alterations are to be made to public and commercial premises to make them accessible to and usable by a person with a disability as it relates to entrances, bathrooms, telephones, drinking fountains, and emergency exits. However, the duty to make alteration to existing premises will not be applicable if it will make the premises structurally impracticable to meet the needs of the requirements, to meet the requirements of the Act, or to effect the alteration would constitute a disproportionate or undue burden. So those are the two exceptions. And of course, the Act defines the term existing to mean premises in existence or under construction immediately before the day appointed for the Act to come into effect. And you'll recall that the minister had announced the date that the Act is to come into effect to be the 14th of February 2022. So to put it clearly, it would be premises in existence or under construction immediately before February 14, 2022. New premises. Public or commercial premises in respect of which construction will begin on or after the 14th of February 2022 are to be constructed in conformity with the following standards. The Act says they are to be readily accessible to and usable by a person with a disability. They are to be built in accordance with the National Building Code, and they are to be designed in such a way as to make the common areas accessible to a person with a disability. Alterations of leased premises. A person with a disability who leases a premises may make a written request to the lessor using the form prescribed to make alterations to the premises to meet the requirements for accessibility and usability before making such alteration. Note the Act speaks to utilizing the form prescribed, and these forms are actually prescribed in the regulations, which was affirmed in October of this year. The lessee is required to submit in support of the request a drawing, plan, diagram, or specification that is prepared and signed by a building practitioner who is approved under the Building Act. The lessor has 30 days of receipt of the notice to communicate his or her refusal in writing, and the lessor, that's the landlord, is to communicate his consent or refusal using the form also prescribed in the disabilities regulations. The lessor cannot unreasonably withhold his consent, because of course you can imagine that that could be the subject of a complaint to which the Disabilities Rights Tribunal can interrogate. A complaint may be lodged where the consent is refused or reasonably withheld, which is what I just said, right? So it is not permissible for the owner or agent of premises who is selling, leasing, or otherwise disposing of the premises to discriminate against a person with a disability in relation to the terms and conditions on which the offer is made to dispose of the premises, refusing to dispose of the premises in any other manner in relation to the disposal of the premises on account of that person's disability. A person managing a premises cannot discriminate against a person with a disability, one, in the way he permits the person to make use of the premises, two, by refusing or deliberately omitting to permit the person to make use of any benefit or facility on the premises, three, by evicting the person on the basis of the disability, four, by subjecting the person to any detriment with the premises, or five, by refusing on the basis of the person's disability to lease the premises to the person. The Disabilities Act allows a reasonable time frame for the alteration to be made to premises in the initial stages of the enactment of the Act, and this is in section 50. In relation to existing premises, the owner or occupier has 24 months from the date appointed, that's the 14th of February 2022, to make the necessary alteration. In relation to premises that are under construction, the owner or occupier has 24 months from the 14th of February 2022 to make the necessary alteration or the date by which construction is completed, whichever is earlier. So you notice the time frame is 24 months from the 14th of February 2022. Any other inaccessibility that may arise utilizing existing premises or any other premises would become a matter for a complaint to be treated with in the Disabilities Rights Tribunal. And if you notice there, no action can lie against the occupier or the owner of premises until the time frame has elapsed. So the deadline is February 14 next year. We'll now look at public passenger vehicles. The Minister of Transport is responsible for ensuring that public passenger vehicles are accessible to and usable by persons with a disability as far as is reasonably practicable. Public passenger vehicles are defined widely to encompass transportation by road, rail, air, or water. So we'll move into a new area, mechanisms for complaints. And persons, this is important to persons with disabilities and need to be exercised by them. So a person with a disability or his or her caregiver who is affected by an act of discrimination may make a complaint to the Jcpd. The grounds on which a complaint can be made are that there has been an act of discrimination carried out against a person with a disability. 2, there is a failure by the respondent in the complaint to comply with codes of practice. You note how important codes of practice are. And 3, there are breaches to the act. So persons have not been complying with the act. The complaint is to be made in writing and it is to be brought within 2 years from the date of the occurrence. And this is very important because if 2 years should elapse, then you have lost your right to bring a complaint. The Jcpd can assist the aggrieved person to make the complaint. An aggrieved person here would be the person with a disability or the caregiver. And where they form the view that there has been a breach of the act. The Jcpd is required to refer the complaint to the Disabilities Rights Tribunal or to alternative dispute resolution. Of course, this would be with the consent of the parties. Employee of the Jcpd shall not provide alternative dispute resolution services in relation to complaints, and that is set out in section 21(2) of the Act. Of course, other institutions such as the Dispute Resolution Foundation could be engaged where the parties so agree. Registration of persons with disabilities. So I'm turning now to some of the provisions that are set out in the regulations that was recently affirmed. Persons with disabilities who desires to have their names entered in the confidential register are required to be registered with the Jcpd. An application for registration is to be submitted to the council, and it is to be accompanied by an eligibility report signed by a registered medical practitioner or a specialist who is trained in diagnosing or treating the disability concerned, along with such charge as the council may impose. Charges are discretionary to the council. Of course, the Act did make provision to give them the discretion to determine the charges to be imposed. The council is to review the application within 30 days after receiving the application or within such time as is reasonably practicable. Where it is impracticable to review the application within the time frame specified. The council is to issue a certificate of registration in the name of the person with a disability and enter his particulars in the register. The certificate of registration issued will be valid for 5 years unless it is revoked, and ceases to be valid on the date of death of the person with a disability. If the council is not satisfied that the person on whose name the application is made is a person with a disability, the council is required under the regulations to refuse to approve the application for registration. The council must inform the applicant, who the legislation defines to be the person with disability or the caregiver, in writing of its decision to refuse to approve the application, and give reason for the decision to refuse. The council is to notify the applicant of the decision to refuse within 14 days after taking the decision. We're turning to renewal of the certificate. Oh, but I need to make this as it relates to the application, the registration of a person with disabilities. There are persons who are at present are registered with the department of the ministry known as the Jcpd, and those persons are required to also bring an application to the new Jcpd to facilitate registration under the Act. The difference, however, is that those persons will not be required to submit an eligibility report because they are already deemed to be a person with a disability. Renewal of certificate of registration. Application is to be made to the council for the renewal of the certificate of registration. An application is to be submitted not less than 60 days before the expiration of the certificate and not more than 6 months after the certificate expires. The date is really important because if you do not comply with it, you will know that you may be asked, well, the Act says, the regulation says, you would be asked to bring a new application, which means you're going to have to start from scratch, which includes submitting an eligibility report. If the application is not made within the specified time frame, the applicant is required to make a new application for registration. Where the person with disability has been diagnosed with a new disability, he or she is required to give details of the new disability in the application for renewal. The council is to review the application within 30 days of receiving the application and approve the application and issue a new certificate if it is satisfied that the person remains a person with a disability or has acquired a new disability. And I think I'm using the term council and Jcpd interchangeably. I'm sorry, when I say council, I'm talking about the new Jcpd. The Act, in fact, refers to, in the Act, it also indicates that the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities established under that Act is also called the Council. So when you hear me using it interchangeably, I'm really talking about the new Jcpd. So the council is to refuse the application if it is not satisfied that the person is not a person with a disability. And the council is required to inform the applicant of its decision to refuse the application within 14 days after the date of the refusal and give reason for the refusal. The council The regulation makes provision for the power to revoke the certificate of registration. It provides that the council is to revoke the certificate of registration if it reasonably believes that the application for registration or information submitted in support of the application is false or misleading. The council is to notify the applicant in writing of its decision to revoke the certificate, stating the reason for the revocation. And all of this, you notice, there to be in writing. The applicant is to be notified within 14 days of the council taking the decision. Review of decisions. An applicant may apply to the minister for the following decisions to be reviewed. You recognize that the council would be making some decisions, so we talk about not registering the person with disability because they're not satisfied the person is a person with a disability. You notice we spoke about the renewal or not renewing the certificate of registration, and we also spoke about revoking. So what the legislation has now provided, it has given persons with disability or their caregiver the opportunity to actually apply to the minister to review the decisions of the council. So the decisions to be reviewed are to refuse approval of an application for registration, not to renew the certificate, to revoke the certificate. The application, that's the application to the minister to review, is to be supported by the reason the applicant believes the application should not have been refused, or the certificate should be renewed, or the certificate should not have been revoked. The application is to be made within 21 days of the date on which the applicant was served the notice of refusal. Please note again, time sensitivity, because if you miss the deadlines, if you miss these time frames, then the council, or the minister in this case, has no authority to act because he would be outside the time frame specified by the legislation. The review is to be conducted by a panel appointed by the minister, and the members of the panel shall comprise of a representative of an organization relating to the disability concerned, a registered medical practitioner or specialist trained in diagnosing and treating the disability concerned, and a representative of the Ministry of Health. And that representative would be nominated by the permanent secretary of that ministry. The panel is to complete the review within 60 days after the minister received the application. If it is impractical to complete within that time frame, then the review is to be completed within such longer period as is reasonably practicable. The panel is to immediately communicate its decision in writing to the council, that's the new Jcpd, and the council is required to serve a copy of the decision of the panel on the applicant within 10 days of receiving the panel's decision and implementing the decision of and it is required rather to implement the decision of the panel accordingly. So if the panel says you should have renewed, then they will have to renew the certificate of registration. If it is that the person is to be registered, then they are required to register, and if they had revoked, then they would have to restore if that is the decision of the panel. We're turning to the confidential register. The council is required to keep and maintain a confidential register comprising particulars of persons with disabilities. That obligation is stipulated under Section 13, I believe, of the Disabilities Act. The register is to be kept in the form determined by the council, and the contents therein are to be kept confidential, and based on the regulation, it says it is to be accessed only by the executive director and the staff of the council in the administration of the act and authorized by the executive director. The council may alter or correct any entry in the register where it verifies that the entry was incorrectly made, or where the information is received from the person with a disability or that person's caregiver regarding the status of the person with a disability subsequent to entering the particulars in the register. The council is required to implement appropriate procedures to ensure that the information contained in the register is up to date, and it is to update the register with the new disability acquired by the person with a disability and remove particulars where a decision is made to revoke or not to renew the certificate where the person with a disability dies or for any other reason determined by the council. Notification of secondary disability. The council is to be notified by a person with a disability or his caregiver of any secondary or subsequent disability acquired or confirmed after the date of registration or renewal. So this is an obligation on persons with disability or their caregiver. The person with disability or that person's caregiver is required to provide information as to the date of the secondary or subsequent disability, the nature of the disability, and the type of disability. So we're now treating with lost, stolen, or destroyed certificates. The council is mandated to issue a new certificate where it is satisfied that the original certificate is lost, stolen, or destroyed. The new certificate is to be issued upon payment of the charge to be imposed by the council, or not to be, that may be imposed by the council, and it shall be valid from the date the original certificate was issued. So let's look at the offenses. Offenses were established in both the Disabilities Act as well as the regulations. So Section 44 of the Disabilities Act establishes offense for assaulting or obstructing an authorized person acting in the performance of his lawful functions. Knowingly giving false or misleading information to the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disability or the council, or any authorized person acting in the performance of his function under the Act. The penalty is a fine, maximum fine, not exceeding $1 million, or imprisonment for 6 months on conviction in a, change that to parish court, or both such fine and imprisonment. This penalty also applies to a body corporate which breaches the Act. However, the director, the manager, secretary, and similar officers can also be ordered to pay a fine not exceeding $500,000 or face imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or both such fine and imprisonment. Offences under the regulations: employees of the council are prohibited from disclosing any matter contained in the register, that is, any information contained in the register. Exceptions: where the information is released for the due administration of the act, or as provided for under any other law. A person who contravenes the provision is liable on conviction before a parish court to a fine not exceeding $1 million or imprisonment to a term not exceeding 12 months. So here are some points to note. The act binds the crown. So whatever we have said here also applies to the crown, and the crown includes the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and every other government offices or institution that exist in Jamaica. The act will be automatically reviewed by a joint select committee of Parliament no later than 3 years after February 14, 2022. In conclusion, the Disability Act, it sets out the framework for equality of treatment and opportunity between persons with disabilities and other persons in society. However, it is impossible to legislate the change in attitude by all persons in society, and this includes persons with disabilities, which is needed to ensure true equality is achieved. It can no longer be an us against them mentality. All of us will have to work together to ensure that the objectives of the Act are achieved, or the provisions of the Act will become nothing more than words on a page. Thank you.
I hope the applause was delayed because of information overload. But we need to make Ms. Smyker feel appreciated for that wealth of information. We are at my favorite part. Ms. Smyker gave some valuable information, some clarity. And now it's a good part of the best part, where we get to now interact with our presenter in terms of our questions that we may have. I have some questions coming from online, but I still want us here in the room to indicate if we have any questions. It was quite a bit of information. Don't you agree? You have to talk to me, you know. Yes, man. And we see I see a hand going up. So I need somebody who has better vision than I to indicate when the hands are going up so that you can be acknowledged. There's a hand to the back. There's a hand to the corner. There are a couple hands going up. Perfect, perfect. So I will take them interchangeably. I will take the online question, one from the floor, so that we can have the interaction going from both sides. Do we agree? Even if you don't, we're going to go. All right, the first one that we have is, if I miss the renewal date for my certificate of registration, upon reapplying, do I also have to submit a new verification form or just an application form? Is there a mic on our table? So the question, we got the question? Okay, so Ms. Michael, I'm going to invite you to come a little closer so that we can share this mic until we get a second one.
So the regulations indicated that if it is the application is not brought for the application for renewal is not brought within the specified time, then then you would have to bring an application for registration. Application for registrations means you're starting again from the beginning. It means that you're now bringing an application to be registered, for your name to be entered into the confidential register. And to support that application, you would also need to provide the council with the eligibility report, because the council will have to satisfy itself that you're a person with a disability whose information is to be recorded in the confidential register.
I hope we are clear. So you have to, is some rules putting in place that is different from what we are used to. So it's important that we pay some attention. There was a hand going up at the back. I think I may have to take my mic to you so that we can all hear. No, but for recording purposes, it will be necessary.
Morning, everyone. I applaud this effort and the time spent in putting this document together, and I'm very happy and pleased that I am here, and I need to acknowledge the persons I know at the head table. Now, I know the detailed information provided for the physical and sensory disabilities, but we need to consider that 10 to 15 or perhaps more of the population at any given time may have a disability. And over 50% of that 15% have learning disabilities and other disabilities combined. So I do not think enough information, I did not get enough details for the education of persons with other disabilities who are in the regular school systems and whose needs are met. We cannot just focus on what schools they should attend and which private or public body should be attending to their needs. We need much more details because these students' needs are not being catered to, especially those with learning disabilities. They are being placed in pathways in the regular school systems with no guidance, no training from the teachers, and I would love to see some more information for these students who are suffering, especially in these COVID times. I don't know if that's a question.
There was a question in it, and I'm going to give Ms. Michael an opportunity to respond.
So recall we have said that the Act, the Council is mandated to prepare codes of practice. Recall Mrs. Jennings had indicated that some codes of practice were prepared and are to be adopted by the Council when it takes effect. Well, all of this will come into place on the 14th of February. As it relates to detailed guidance for education and training, and I believe employment is also one, and healthcare and health facilities another, those detailed guidance will be set out in the code of practice. So persons will know all the information as it relates to education and training, employment, and healthcare and facilities. I hope I answered your question. No? The Act would not go because you want practical guidance. And so recall it is the work of a Jcpd, the act of the Jcpd to prepare the codes that will guide the operations of educational institution. So the codes will become available, and I suspect when the Jcpd is implemented, that they will be doing sensitization in relation to the code. It is not for the ministry because the ministry does not have that mandate under the Act.
Keep that one. Oh. We take one more question from the floor. Ms. Pinnock.
So I have a question as it relates to like accessing persons with disabilities having access to certain facilities. For example, right? If a person who has like autism, but not not severe autism, that person is able to function. But if that person applies for a driver's license, however, that person stated that he learns differently from how we would learn. For example, the written exams, the written part of the driver's license, you have to take it before. However, the individual was saying that he prefers the he is not a hands-on person, right? And in the Disability Act, we're stating that we are giving persons access to these facilities. How is it then that we are catering to these persons and giving them not equal access but equitability? Speaking of the equitability aspect towards it, because it seems like the Act is considering the person as a person that it is taken away from the disability itself. It's distinct. It is distinguishing the person, even though the person has the disability. It is stating that, hey, I am a human, but I don't have a disability, or I do have a disability, but I have access to these things that it's not catered to me. You understand what I'm saying?
It's not accessible.
So it is there, however, it's not catered to me personally. That is how I see the Act. That is how I see the situation here.
The Disabilities Act is not yet in effect. It comes into effect February 14, 2022. I agree with you that how society currently operates, it is not allowing for persons with disabilities to have what is described or defined as the reasonable arrangements that they need in various circumstances. And so currently, for persons with autism, as you mentioned, who would go to the depot for his driver's license, they are not considering the way he learns. And so the lesson is not, or the test, or the test that is to be taken is not being administered in a manner that is accessible to him. That is not a fault of the Act, because the Act is not yet in effect. But what the Act says is that when it comes into effect, he can make the request, because, well, the Jcpd is supposed to be making the country aware or sensitizing the country to the different reasonable arrangements that are required to allow people to function, people with disabilities to function effectively in the society. As that is done, we know that there will still be institutions and systems that special intervention will have to be made to ensure that they understand and they know how to facilitate different persons with disabilities. If it is that having learned and having heard and the law is in place and such systems refuse, that is when the person with the disability can report the matter to the Jcpd and an investigation is done and an intervention, because then that would be seen as discrimination. So it is not the act that is setting up the individual as a separate human being, but the act is recognizing that the disability manifests in the individuals that will require different arrangements to be made for him or her to function effectively in society. So it is allowing for the society to put those things in place to ensure that the different persons with the varying disabilities can function. Get me? Understand? Clear? Sure? One second, the mic is coming to you.
I would also like to this would be kind of a suggestion that would make it a bit easier, like teaming up with other sections or other, like for example the Ministry of Transport and Works, or that ministry that deals with the whole drivers, learners, agencies and all of that, to kind of work alongside them to make it a bit easier for these persons that are working with these other ministries and incorporating them into our facility. Now go further deal with the educational aspects of it.
So policies and other legislations and so on over time will, those that currently do not reflect non-discrimination against persons with disabilities would have to, as time progresses. All right, Mrs.? Just a moment.
I just want to say that when the act comes into effect, recall that if a complaint is lodged, then one of the orders that the tribunal can make, so let us say your matter elevates to the tribunal actually can order the, and using your example, the persons with the driver's license, so that would be the government. The tribunal can order the government to take such action as is reasonable to treat with the complaint that is being interrogated. All right?
Perfect. One more question coming from online. The time frame mentioned in the regulations, does it include weekends? So the time frame attached to the different sanctions, I would imagine, or times for renewals and so on, does it include weekends, or is it just a 5 working days, 60 working days?
Unless the act or the regulation says working day or business day, then the time frame given includes weekends.
Very good. Any questions from the floor? Okay, I'm going to take Mr. Harris, and then I'm going to go to the back. I must sanitize this mic in a minute.
Okay, a couple of questions. I'll make them quick. One, the tribunal is being appointed by the minister. Is there any structure in place that insulates that person's health, since some of the decisions that the tribunal made might, affect the government. Secondly, for in terms of the Act, how does it relate to other regulations which already exist? For example, the Act coming to being in February, but we have the National Building Codes, and some of the issues that the Act would cover would also be included may also be affected by the Building Code. How do decisions that relate to the National Building Code, how do they impact what is being, the decisions? And thirdly, persons, it is said that for persons to make a complaint, right, the persons would have to be aggrieved, right? So I'm just thinking that, like, in situations, for example, let's say where somebody could be seriously injured or lose their life because, let's say, there's no text line for persons who are deaf to complain. You're saying that there's no, unless somebody has been aggrieved, a complaint can't be made, since the complaint has to be made by the person. So you can clarify that for me. I think those are the comments.
I think there is a little bit, we need to be clear about the complaint question that you just asked. So that question, the presenter is asking for some clarity. So I'm going to ask you to rephrase the question for us.
Okay. No, the comment was that if I heard correctly, for issues to be taken to the tribunal, it has to be done by a person who has been, at least affected in some way, aggrieved in some way, right? So I'm thinking that, until for issues of, issues like of a national concern to reach the tribunal level, somebody would have to be affected by it first. I don't know if that clarification works for you.
Okay. So let us start with the aggrieved person. You are correct. The Act sets out the situations that must exist for the complaint to be the basis of a complaint. So I'm not sure when you say of a national level, is it that the issue would be outside of the four circumstances that the legislation speaks to? Then if that is so, that would not be something that the tribunal can treat with. That would have to be something that perhaps will have to be elevated to our Supreme Court. Right? As it relates to the national building, the building code, remember there's already a building act in place, and I believe there's a building code that is also established. It is my understanding that before you can build, based on how the legislation is set up, you have to get approval from the parish council or the municipal council, who will ensure that the criteria as set out under the building code is complied with. And those criteria also include issues as it relates to the accessibility and usability of premises by persons with disability. So once you conform with the code, then you should be conforming with the Disabilities Act when it comes into effect on the 14th of February. The appointment of the members of a tribunal. I'm not quite sure what you were saying, but recall that the members are appointed by the minister, but those persons are appointed after consultation with stakeholders. So persons from the disabilities communities will have a say in the persons who are recommended to the minister for consideration for those persons to be appointed.
Recommendations came through the CDA.
Oh, and I'm being told that the recommendation will come through the CDA.
Okay. The next question we have online before we take one here on the floor is, does the current registration status of persons with disabilities to the JCPD? I'm not sure that the question should have started with does, but would the current registration of persons with disabilities to the JCPD be still valid when the new JCPD is established?
Yes, it will. Recall, you will still have to bring an application, but because you are deemed to be a person with a disability, having registered with the Department of the Ministry of Labor, you will not be required to complete an eligibility report. But for your name to go into the confidential register, there is an application form that will have to be completed to facilitate that.
That was a very popular and common one. I'll now take one question from the floor.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to the JCPD for the relentless work being done around this act and it becoming a reality. We are really very excited about that. Quickly, I know you said one question, but it has parts, okay? So the first one is, if you're not a registered person with the JCPD, can you make a complaint to the DRT, right? That's one. Two, the issue of providing interpreting at educational institutions. Clearly, the Act is asking that these institutions are responsible for providing interpreting services. But are we talking about the ideal or the minimum? Because when you look at an institution, for example, like UTEC, if 30 deaf persons go to to that institution and they're doing 30 different courses, the UTEC is being required to provide interpreting services at their cost to all these 30 students. I just want to be clear that that's what we are saying. You're hearing me? From the top? Right, so I'm saying that the issue of, say, for example, 30 students are now attending the University of Technology, just random, right? And they are deaf, so they'll require interpretation for all their classes. They are doing 30 different classes. The University of Technology is required by this act to provide interpreting services at the cost of the university to all these 30 students. I just want to make sure that's what we're saying. And then my final question is, in an instance where a body corporate is fined, or their governance structure is fined for not maintaining the codes of the act, if they fail to still provide, use the same UTEC example. They're brought to the tribunal and what have you, they're fined, they pay the fine, but the situation is unresolved. How do we move from there? Because an agency could say it's cheaper for me to pay the fine than to put systems in place on a permanent level. So just wanted clarity on that.
starting with your last question first. If the tribunal gives an order, yes, you have paid the fine, but you continue, it is now an offense under the Act. And in fact, the tribunal or the government can actually, the Jcpd, that would be the council, can actually take that person to the court for breaching the legislation. Because you're now breaching an order, right? So that's the first. As it relates to the UTEC example with the interpreters, remember the organizations are to provide reasonable arrangements, and it didn't say that it must be 1, 2, or 3 or how many. It says that you are to provide it, and so if you have 30, then reasonable arrangements are to be made, and it will have to be at the expense of, in your case, UTEC. Unless, of course, there's an undue burden. Remember, there's an exception. And so, right, unless it is that UTEC could very well say there's a cost factor. That, however, does not prevent the person with a disability from going to the council to report or to make a complaint to say that UTEC has not provided the service, the interpreters. But UTEC could, in defense at the DRT, Disabilities Rights Tribunal, say that it is really costly and they cannot afford it, and the DRT would have to take a decision on that matter. So the first question, can a person who is not registered make a complaint? The Act says the aggrieved person. So if you are not an aggrieved person, remember, the aggrieved person here could be the caregiver of a person with a disability or the person with a disability themselves. So those are the persons who can bring the complaint.
The matter around the disability, does it have to be registered?
The scheme of the Act is speaking about persons who are registered. So if you want a benefit under the Act, you really are supposed to be registered under the Act.
Thank you.
I'll take an online question. Temporary versus permanent disabilities. Persons with this kind of, well, I believe that the certificate being referred here is a certificate of registration, may need to be reviewed. It's not a question. Let me rephrase. This is a statement. So there is a concern. How do we treat temporary disabilities as opposed to permanent disabilities? And then a statement comes to say, persons with this kind of certificate may need to be reviewed every 2 years instead of every 5 years. That is if there is consideration in legislation for temporary conditions. So will the Jcpd be treating with temporary disabilities? And when you answer that part of the question, a recommendation is now being made that temporary disabilities, if a certificate is issued to those persons, that they come under a review process for every 2 years instead of every 5 years.
The legislation does not contemplate temporary disabilities. If you look at the definition of a person with a disability, it includes a person who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment which hinders his full and effective participation. As it relates to the review, there is provision in the Act for legislation to be reviewed after 3 years of the date that the Act takes effect.
We can take a question from the floor. So many hands, I don't know who to choose. We can take a question from the floor. No questions from the floor? Well, the online persons are buzzing, and here is a question. Will there be sanctions in place for persons who utilize the accessible parking spaces without proper permits to do so? Would you like me to repeat the question, Dr. Hendricks? The question is there a sanction in place for persons without disabilities who utilize the accessible parking spaces without the required permits to do so?
Okay, so I think we need to go back to saying each time that the Disabilities Act is not yet in effect until February 14, 2022. When it comes into effect, then the new council for persons with disabilities would have to have an agreement, an MOU with the ministry that has responsibility currently for the municipal councils that have responsibility for parking spaces and so on and so forth. So that is an arrangement that will have to be made with the new council and the municipal offices or the ministry with that responsibility. Am I correct, Mrs. Michael?
We can now take a question from the floor. We have a question coming from the community of we have a question coming from Shirley Lee, so our interpreter will share with us in a little bit what that question is. But in the meantime, there is another question. Will there be a charge to register with the Jcpd?
That's a matter to be determined by the council. The Act did provide that the council may impose charges for its services, and note the word may. However, that will be for the Jcpd when it is established to take a decision. And we're talking about the council, the new Jcpd we're talking about here. So the short answer is we are not able to say if they will be charging when it take effect. It's a matter to be determined by them.
So it is fair to say that the Jcpd has the leverage to charge for these services. I believe that's the clarity that was needed. So the Jcpd has the leverage to create charges for its registration process, and when that entity is established, those decisions will be made. Are you ready for me, Tony?
She said it's just a statement. Right here.
Okay, I have a statement from Shirley Lee. The statement is the complainant under the protection for discrimination, the complainant should be able to show how exactly the discriminatory incidents create harm for him or her. For example, socioeconomic damages, no income funds to support your children because you were denied a job, you have the expertise and proven qualifications for. I think this is coming under the broadness of discrimination, and we possibly can do some reinforcement for the community to understand how under discrimination you are protected and how it actually works. So, Ms. Michael?
Remember that discrimination is so wide, and so you would not want to narrow the scope in the event, because if you do legislate and put in specific terms, you may very well leave persons out. Persons may be faced with situations that may not be covered with legislation. So as it relates to what was just being said, the socio-economic terms and those sort of information, those are information I'm sure that the DRT would require in order for them to first determine whether or not there was in fact a discrimination, and to thereafter go on to make an award as to how to treat with the discrimination.
Are there any questions from the floor? Okay, we are coming down to the last 2 questions for this section, and then we will turn over to our second session. But the last 2 questions, is there an established criteria for identifying members to the tribunal? So yes, it is understood that the minister does the selection, but is the minister working with a criteria to do such a selection? And then I have one after this one. Who is taking this bonus question? Mrs. Jennings?
What a hard one. It's not hard. There is a criteria that is used. The selection came through the Combined Disabilities Association, and those were requested of the named professional groups that are mentioned in the Act. So for example, recommendations went to the engineer group, to the accounting group, the finance group, economics, and human resource. And so they provided a slate of persons who they were recommending from these bodies, and those have been submitted to the minister for consideration.
Yes, in can carry it over to the Spanish Town office. NIS office.
And also from the agencies representing persons with disabilities who form part of that group.
So it is to be understood that the tribunal will have those key professional areas and also representation out of the community of persons with disabilities. I hope that answered your question. The last one, will agencies serving persons with disabilities play a role in educating the community on the Disabilities Act, or is this a requirement only of the Jcpd? I believe it's a question for Dr. Hendricks, but the tone of all of this is coming from, in light that we are moving towards February 14, 2022, which is a few weeks away. What is the intention or the thrust for educating the wider population and the community of persons with disabilities as it regards to the Disabilities Act?
So, the education and awareness and sensitization, although it is a function of the council, when it comes, it is also a responsibility of every person who has a disability, those who work in the disability sector agencies, other stakeholders, who might work with persons with disabilities, or persons who are advocates who are not who do not necessarily have a disability, but they have a part to play in society, and they have the information that they can share. So although it is a mandatory responsibility of the council, society, persons with disabilities, agencies that serve persons with disabilities have that responsibility too.
The duty and the role of us all to ensure that we are making everyone aware. We have a next question online. The last question we see online regarding the renewal process. Why was the renewal process selected for 5 years instead of 10 years? Dr. Hendricks.
Through consultation, the recommendation was made that 5 years be the time frame. Additionally, based on good practice from other countries who are implementing the legislation, 5 years is a time frame within which such a certificate is renewed.
We have come to the end of our present session on the Disabilities Act and the way forward. I hope that all the questions will keep going as this very valuable piece of this very valuable discussion will be made available on our social media platforms, and we keep the discussion going so that we can have our questions answered as we prepare for a new day come February 14, 2022. I now invite the facilitator for section 2 to join as she takes us through the last portion of today's deliberation. For those who are in room, there are refreshments before you. You may consume as we move along. So the moderator for our second session is Mrs. Jacqueline Bennett, who is our senior social worker here at the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. I invite you to make her welcome as she cruises us to the last part of our session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so we will now continue the discussion on looking at the new role and function of the Jcpd. But before we do so, we want to just give a little insight as to who will take us through this role. So, as my colleague mentioned earlier on, that my name is Jacqueline Bennett, and I am employed by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, and I'm stationed at the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disability. I'm your moderator for this session. So today, I have the honor to introduce to you our very own Dr. Christine Hendricks. Now, Dr. Hendricks has years of experience working in the field of disability. And today, in our presentation, she will take us through the role and function of the Jcpd. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to sit back, relax, as Dr. Hendricks cruises us into the new Jcpd. Could you put your hands together and give her a round of applause? Thank you. So Dr. Hendricks, cruise us in, please.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bennett. Thank you so much. So we have been talking from morning about... We have been talking all morning about the Disabilities Act and what it says. And so it falls to me at this point in time to be speaking about the functions, the roles and functions of this council that we have been talking about from morning. So in addition to the Disabilities Act is seeking to promote and protect and ensure the full and equal enjoyment by persons with disabilities of their privileges and interests and benefits and treatments on an equal basis with others, it also establishes the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Mrs. Smyker would have explained earlier that this new Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities is to be a body corporate, which the Interpretation Act, Section 28, applies. And she explains what it means to be a body corporate, so I would not go into that aspect. So the council shall perform such functions as may be necessary to give effect to the objects of the act that was specified in Section 3, and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing, such functions shall include advising the minister on matters pertaining to persons with disabilities in an effort to promote effective measures for 1, the prevention of circumstances which cause a disability in persons, the rehabilitation of persons with disabilities, advising the minister on public education concerning disabilities, and 4, improvement in living conditions of persons with disabilities by facilitating their social and economic development. Also, advising the minister on current trends, policies and programs concerning disabilities, and 6, developments internationally regarding the rights of persons with disabilities with a view to improving the service delivery to and the status of persons with disabilities. The Council will also advise the minister in terms of monitoring the operations of such trends, policies and programs, and reporting to the minister the results of such monitoring. 8, conducting public education programs about this Disabilities Act and related legislation, highlighting the requirements thereunder. 9, preparing codes of practice under Section B for the avoidance of discrimination on the grounds of disability. 10, on its own initiative or upon the request of the minister, making recommendations to the minister regarding the enforcement of this act and other national measures for the avoidance of discrimination against persons with disabilities. And 11, policies and programs of the government to have due regard to the interests of persons with disabilities. The Council may A, undertake, arrange for, or support, whether financially or otherwise, research or the provision of advice or information. With the approval of the minister, impose charges for facilities or services made available by it for any purpose. The Council may enter upon any premises other than a dwelling house at a reasonable time for the purpose of carrying out an inspection or enquiry for ensuring compliance with the Act. The Council shall, upon request by the minister, make recommendations or give advice under this section on any matter specified in the request. Now, we spoke about earlier the Disabilities Rights Tribunal and the fact that persons with disabilities can take matters to the tribunal. Now, if it is that persons with disabilities or any other person is aggrieved with the Council, the provisions of the Public Defender Interim Act of 1999 shall have effect as regards any complaints made against the Council's operation in furtherance of its duties. So the public defender is the body or the entity to which matters of persons' grievances with the Council can be made. So, what does the Act say about this Council and how it should be managed? There shall be established a board of management of the Council, which shall, subject to the provision of this Act, be responsible for the determination of the policy of and the general administration of the affairs of the Council. The second schedule, Section 6.2, the provision of the second schedule shall have effect as to the constitution of the board. And so, the minister, after consultation with the chairman, shall give the Council such directions of a general character as to the policy to be followed by the Council in the performance of its functions, as appear to the minister to be necessary in the public interest, and the Council shall give effect thereto. We had said earlier that the Council shall prepare codes of practice for guidance on matters under this Act, and B, review such codes of practice for guidance and, where appropriate, recommend alterations thereto. The Council, I should have said it earlier, that the Council will and must be made up of, in addition to other individuals with other skills and qualification, must be made up of the community of persons with disabilities. And the representatives must come from the groups of persons with physical disabilities, persons who are deaf and hard of hearing, or the organizations they're representing them, persons with intellectual disabilities, or the agencies or entity representing them, and persons with visual impairment or blindness, or the organizations representing them. The Council shall be exempt from paying taxes and duties. So the income of the Council shall be exempt from income tax. Any transfer by the Council of any property belonging to it, or any right or interest created in, over, or otherwise with respect to any such property shall be exempt from transfer tax. No customs duty, general consumption tax, or any similar import shall be payable upon any article imported into Jamaica or taken out of bond in Jamaica by the Council and shown to the satisfaction, sorry, I should have read the sentence completely. So, no customs duty, general consumption tax, or other similar import shall be payable upon any article imported into Jamaica or taken out of bond in Jamaica by the Council and shown to the satisfaction of the Commissioner of Customs to be required for the use of the Council in the performance of its functions. The Council shall be exempt from liability to stamp duty in respect of any instrument executed by it or on its behalf. Borrowing powers. Subject to the provisions of subsection 2, the Council may borrow such sums as may be required by it for meeting its obligations or discharging any of its functions. All monies, section 3, all monies of the Council not immediately required to be expended for the purpose of meeting any of the obligations or discharging any functions of the Council may be invested in such securities as may be approved by the Minister responsible for finance. And the Council may, with the approval of that Minister, sell all or any such securities. The confidential register. The Council shall maintain a confidential register with the particulars of persons with disabilities. And the register shall be kept in such form, and all entries, alterations, and removal of entries shall be made in such manner as may be prescribed. And you heard earlier all those prescriptions as shared by our senior legal officer. A person whose name is for the time being in the register is in this part referred to as a person registered as having a disability, and shall be issued in the prescribed manner with a certificate of registration and any other material. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions? I'll just stay right here. No, I won't stay right here. I'll sit and you can ask your questions.
Okay, so Let's put our hands together again for Dr. Hendricks' presentation. And indeed, the presentation was a full review of what the new JCPD will look like. Now, is there any question on the floor for Dr. Hendricks? Okay, online, is there any question? And the question is, who will pay the staff of the new JCPD? Dr. Hendricks?
The JCPD. From sums provided to it by the government of Jamaica, from the consolidated fund.
Any other question from the floor? All right, so we'll now go online. Online question?
Thanks. Afternoon. One question, Dr. Hendricks. It is I. Okay. Question, as it relates to the JCPD becoming the new JCPD and employing the relevant staff to support the Act, is the same 24 months being given as implementation of the various phases of, or the changes at a national level expected in line with the Act? So the employment of new staff and so on, will that be done on a phased basis over the 24 months as well?
Initially the minister.
Okay, so the organizational structure was done and that has been approved. And so we have positions, or 72 positions approved by the Post Operations Committee of the Ministry of Finance. And we will commence advertisements for the positions shortly. We will be operating the positions on a phased basis. So we are hoping that the first phase that has been approved will come into effect, starting with the advertisements that will go out, and of course will go throughout the next financial year. So we will be seeing advertisements shortly for the positions that are there, and we are hoping that the interviews and so on will be done in short order so we can have the positions in effect.
Dr. Reed, then Mr. Harris.
Thank you. Just want to find out where you will be operating from. Do you have a new building, new offices for the new staff that you will be employing?
All right, so there is a building that has been identified that is currently being renovated to ensure that it can hold or accommodate the new JCPD. There are also spaces across the island that are being identified for at least 14 social workers or disability management officers. So they will be operating in each parish.
Mr. Harris?
Okay. Are there activities that are being done by the current JCPD which will be shed when the new JCPD becomes effective?
Could you repeat again?
Are there activities that you're doing now which you will no longer do under the new JCPD? No, I'm asking.
The Act states that the council will have to also, in addition to the advisory functions and the research and the everything else, it will have to also carry programs to enable the economic and social development of persons with disabilities. So if you're asking if we will still have a rehabilitation section, yes, the new council will have rehabilitation, social services, transition services.
I have Zandria.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have a question about tax, the tax policy, the tax exemption form. I want to know, I have two questions. The tax exemption form, some people had applied from 2001, and does that still, when you get that exemption in 2001, does it still apply to today, or do you have to update it? Do you need a new one after a period of time? Do you need to get a new tax exemption letter, or is it something that you can keep and use over time, all the time, forever and ever?
Yeah, your tax exemption remains with you as long as you have the disability. So that's a lifetime benefit. It doesn't matter. Well, I understand that you want to know if it will be, you'll be required to renew it in the new era. No, you will not.
I have a question online. How often will the council review the code of practice?
Only the council can answer that question. It doesn't exist yet.
On another question online, will the council have a unit for complaints?
Yes. Yes, the council will have a unit for complaints and investigations. And complaints, compliance and investigation and access. Yes.
Question?
Will the council have an established officer to explain the Disabilities Act to persons with disabilities?
Public awareness, yes, but I understand maybe you're asking if the entity itself will have persons in it who will be able to answer questions. I would imagine so. It would make sense, but that's a question for the new entity.
Pardon me if this was mentioned in full before, but are you able to state the sections or the departments or divisions of the new council at this point?
Just give me, can take another question and I'll come back.
Okay, another question online. Explain the relationship between the new Jcpd and MLSS. What is the lifespan of the tribunal? Ms. Michael? Tribunal. Yeah.
As soon as the law takes effect on the 14th of February 2022, the body known as the Disabilities Tribunal will be established, and it will remain unless the law says otherwise. So there is no time frame for its existence. It will always exist unless it is removed by legislation. As it relates to the
the board. The Act speaks to the board and the length of time for service of the. The Act speaks to the board and the length of time for the board, either 2 or 3 years. But it can be, or members there can be a renewal in terms of the members of the board. In terms of the tribunal, I don't recall seeing a time.
To answer the question?
Okay, so in terms of the structure for the new JCPD, there are some groupings in terms of positions, or divisions rather, and that would be administration, human resource division, rehabilitation, transition, and social services, access, compliance, and investigation, policy, research, and project management, and the confidential registry.
Okay. Online question. What will the staff complement be for the new JCPD? Question. What will the staff complement be for the new JCPD?
Well, the first phase is 72 as has been approved by the Ministry of Finance, and that's the first phase. What happens thereafter, the new entity determines.
Any other question on the floor?
I see a question online here. What will be the relationship of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and the new JCPD? So the JCPD would become a body corporate, which would be an agency of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So while it will have its own management board, there will still be reporting relationships to the ministry. And so in terms of like the annual reports that are required under the public management body, Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, those reports would go through the parent ministry for submission to the Parliament. So all those reporting relationships under that act would enable the relationship to continue with the ministry.
Any other question on the floor, online? One more question, okay.
No, I'm going to ask a question.
Are you going to ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, then.
Okay,
go ahead.
Afternoon, everyone. Being that the new JCPD will take effect February 14, 2022, and the positions that are available are not yet being advertised, when is it that these positions are going to be advertised? As in, I know you have explained early on that the positions will be made available and will be advertised soon, but is there a time frame?
Okay, so the operations of the HR functions are being conducted by the ministry, and I did indicate that the positions will be advertised shortly. So of course that information will be provided to current and prospective persons who are interested in applying. So you will see that shortly. The HR department is working on the submission of all the job descriptions, at least to persons within the entity at first, and when it is advertised, which would be advertised in the public media, persons can compete for the positions.
Okay.
Persons were asking, will the board report to the PS? No, based on the Disabilities Act, the board reports to the minister.
So I have actually two questions. One, as it relates to individuals who had applied for current benefits from the JCPD, such as AAG or EAG, and has not gotten their checks, how would they receive their checks? How would they receive their money or the things that they had applied for with the new JCPD? Two, would there be additional rules and responsibilities for the case officers, or, you know, just asking for a friend?
In terms of the new role for the case officers, the job descriptions would outline all the functions that they will perform. Or in terms of the requests for economic empowerment grants and for assistive aids, those applications will still be considered for approval.
You said that the new JCPD, February 14, 2022, correct? How many deaf staff will be included in that new dispensation, the new JCPD? How many deaf staff are you planning to hire?
Are there any more questions online as well?
Somebody was asking how many deaf persons. I don't think any entity determines the type of persons. Persons apply, and based on the qualification, everybody has an opportunity to compete once you have the competence and the qualifications necessary.
Questions on the floor? Any other questions? Online? One more? Read the questions. Okay, we're going to now read the questions online.
Does the Board of Management reports to the PS? Oh.
What is the question? Check. This is running back and forth. She's going to read because they're asking about somebody asking about the Board of Management. Oh. So.
Okay, this question is online from our online listeners. Does the Board of Management report to the JCPD? Oh, sorry, to the Permanent Secretary?
That was answered already. We said based on the Act, the Board of Management reports to the Minister.
Oh, okay. Okay, next question then. How will reporting work at the parish office?
The question relating to the reporting relationship between the JCPD and the MLSS parish offices, that was not answered. I guess the individual who is asking that question online is picturing what obtains now, where the JCPD has social workers located in the MLSS parish offices across the island, and they would report into our head office at 18 Ripon Road. The question is mirroring if the systems will be the same.
Please recall that the JCPD is a new entity, a body corporate that will regulate its own function. Whatever obtains now is a policy of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. It does not carry over to the new entity. The new entity will establish its own procedure. It means that we here cannot say how the body corporate will determine that the reporting arrangements will work. What we do know, they will engage their own staff and the staff will be reporting to them or to it.
All right. Another question?
Dr. Reed?
Yes, thank you. Since the Ministry of Education has a special education unit, Mrs. Dr. Hendricks, I want to know what will the relationship be like with between the new JCPD and the unit, the special education unit at the Ministry of Education?
That is not a question for this current entity.
But what we can say is that the new JCPD, I'm sure, will continue that relationship and partnership with the Special Education Department from the Ministry of Education. And we have a representative from the Special Education Department, actually the head, on the board. And I'm sure that is likely to happen going forward.
Yes, thanks for that, because I was just wondering how if you won't have an overlapping of functions. No, okay.
What time? Any online questions? Okay.
Okay, just a follow-up question from the question that was asked relating to the function of the social workers reporting to the new JCPD. So the social workers will not be housed at the MLSS. So I'm assuming it's a yes or no answer.
We had indicated that there's accommodation that is being facilitated or being searched out across the island to accommodate the new JCPD. So when that is identified, wherever it is going to be housed, persons who are employed to the new JCPD will know where their new location will be.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question from the floor? Okay. Any other question online? You have a question? Okay. Can you behind you? Behind you.
I hope that we can answer it in terms of the having an interpreter, a JSL interpreter on staff for the new council, or staff members who are adequately trained in sign language to be able to handle the flood of deaf persons that we want to come to the new council.
I would imagine that the council would have the necessary resources to enable its functions, and that would include to its clients.
Going once. Another question?
Is it a situation where the interns that are now at the JCPD will continue on the new JCPD?
Interns.
Okay, so we have some interns that are working with the JCPD, and we have 2 of them here. Welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
In terms of your question, we have 4 of them here?
Not right now.
No. So yeah, we have 5. We have 2 represented here. And so your assignment will continue with the new JCPD until your tenure is up. So I think you're assigned for 6 months?
Yes, miss.
Right, so you'll continue wherever that new JCPD will be until your time is up.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other question on the floor? Is there any question online? No? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your questions. They were very, very valuable questions. And I hope the response were good enough and satisfied to your expectation. So now we will ask Mrs. Diane Jennings, our Chief Technical Director, to bring the closing remarks. Let's put our hands together.
Thank you, Mrs. Bennett, for that. I want to thank you all for this very productive day. I think we have achieved our outcome and our objectives that we have set out for today, which is to ensure that the persons within the disability network organizations, their board of management and senior executive staff members have been apprised even more fully of the contents and the provisions of the Disabilities Act and the regulations, so that you're even more empowered to deliver and to instruct and to guide and to empower the persons you serve. And so we really want to thank you all for coming out today. And maybe I should ask you, what is it that you learned today that you didn't learn before or you didn't know before? Maybe I should ask that. We have a little time to ask from each table. Something you learned today that you didn't know before and you appreciate the learning. I see we have somebody right behind you there.
Hi, I want to go first so that I can put it up. I never know you're going to have a new JCPD. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of questions are asked about that because they're uncertain what the new entity will do and if the same individuals will be there. So I think that's what a lot of the questions I'm picking up. Persons were uncertain about that aspect.
Okay, so that's a new learning today. So yes, we'll have a new JCPD. So even though it will have the name, it will be a new council. A council to be called Jamaica Council for Persons with Disability, but is in a new status. It will now become a body corporate, which would mean that it will be able to manage its own activities and to ensure that, you know, they can deliver more and on time. And of course, we hope we'll have less bureaucracy and we will be able to fulfill our mandate in a more effective way. Thank you. Anybody else? New learning? We have.
All right. I would say just about everything was new. So, I mean, I appreciated the information and the detail and, you know, being the pace at which it was delivered. It gave us time to digest it. But for me, what stood out was the premises and housing
provisions.
Yes, provision. And I still have many questions about that, but that's for a different time. But for me, I recognize that it's a serious thing. I mean, you hear it, but it's really serious. And it doesn't just affect some people. It really affects everybody.
The whole nation. And so it's important that we even look at not just what we can do for now, but adopt the whole universal design approach. So once we make the adjustments for buildings or for new construction, we take that into consideration, that it is be a building for all users, despite having a disability, whether you're elderly, whether you're young. If we take that approach where this building is designed in a way that all persons can utilize it, then we'll be making provisions for persons with disabilities if we take that approach. Go ahead, Mr. Harris.
Well, for me, I thought I knew most things, but I didn't realize that the DRT, the members, didn't have a term limit.
Oh, the term limits. Oh, okay. Well, persons may want to resign from the tribunal or may want to indicate that they'll serve for a time period, and so we take that into consideration.
But maybe we'll have some lifetime members, and maybe that would all go well in terms of institutional knowledge and advocacy. Anybody else?
I've learned a lot in terms of the act because I kind of know of the act. However, this begs me to do my own research on how I will approach persons with disabilities and also how to personally advocate for these persons and how to educate not just people around me but that community and further society at large. So I'm really thankful and grateful for the opportunity to be here and to gain some knowledge.
Very good. And we appreciate you being here, and we notice your appetite for learning. And I see you reading the Act on a daily basis, trying to get the knowledge, asking the questions. So that is very good, because when you get that knowledge, then you will be able to share and to guide and to be a peer counselor, to be a peer champion for the cause of persons with disabilities. I'll take one last one, although I think our participants online are also indicating what they're learning, and we will be documenting that, and we'll take one more.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I did not realize that there was a 5-year limit on our IDs. So right now, I think I need to inform persons that I know to get their IDs sorted out, and also maybe I'm wondering how, this is a question, it's going to turn into a question, how best can we inform persons with a disability that although you have this ID in your possession, there is a time limit to it, so that more persons can be aware of this factor and not be put in a sticky situation.
Okay, so we will be continuing the sensitization sessions, not just as part of Disabilities Awareness Week, and we will be heightening that communication program. We'll be getting a consultant to drive that process for the Jcpd. So you'll be hearing more ads, you'll be hearing more information, and of course through our social workers and the Jcpd in general, we'll be getting that information out in terms of the provisions of the Act as it relates to persons with disabilities, their obligations, and so we'll be compartmentalizing the information to treat with different target groups. So certainly for the persons with disabilities, what is it that they need to know under the Act, and timelines in particular, we will be getting that information out to them. So we appreciate that. All right, so...
Nothing for those online, Mrs. Jennings. No comment for those online.
Oh, all right. So I want to thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to the continuing relationship and partnership with all these disability sector partners, and it's out of consultation with you that we are having this session today. So we will be continuing that communication, continuing the conversation, and we will be looking forward to what we can deliver together to ensure that the Disabilities Act not just become a document, but something that is being implemented, and you will be the watchdogs for it, as will be the new Jcpd. So thank you very much again, and you do have a good rest of afternoon. But before I sit, I think I'm also doing the vote of thanks. So let me thank the team members from the Jcpd who has worked very hard in preparing and organizing this activity and all the activities for Disabilities Awareness Week. So let me just identify the members we have here. We have, I don't know why she's sitting, standing is Miss Pinnock, our PR person, and she's also admin in a way and other things. We have a small team at the Jcpd, you know. So guess what? I really have to big up the small team of the JCPD, because when persons hear about the JCPD, they think we have a big staff there. I'm on special assignment at the JCPD since February 2018, and it's a small staff that we have to work with. And so they have coordinated, collaborated, and worked together to achieve all that we have achieved so far. So we need to big them up. We also have Tarika Hales, Alvaro Holness, Henry Holness, Campbell Holness, sorry. Dr. Hendricks, who is standing down there. And beside her, Mrs. Wright Henry, the secretary. Henry Wright, I'm getting all, is this learning disability now? Mrs. Jacqueline Bennett. And we have 2 team members who are doing special assignment for their social work at the JCPD. I'll ask them to stand. Welcome. Thank you for participating. We have 2 interns with us too. Ask them to stand. Thank you for participating. We have Miss Collins. And we have Miss Mannings, who is outside. And we have our intern, another intern, who has been asking lots of questions. Yes, thanks for coming. Roberta Pinnock, yes. Thank you, Miss Roberta. And I also want to thank the members of the MIS team from the ministry who has facilitated us today. And our technical team, videographers. And by no way least, we want to thank our interpreters who have facilitated this session, both those who are online and those who are here. We are moving towards the new JCPD that is accessible and that is accommodating and that is ensuring that the rights of persons with disabilities are protected, are promoted, and are advanced so that they can participate fully in the society. I hope I didn't leave out anybody.
Yes, and legal.
Oh, I didn't say PR? It's because they're not in the room right now. But yes, we want to say thanks to the PR team who has also facilitated us. And Mrs. Janita Smichael, our Senior Legal Officer. And we also had Mr. John Paul Watson from the legal team who joined us today as well. So thank you all. We note the different participants from the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, Jamaica Association for Intellectual Disabilities, Jamaica Society for the Blind, the Early Stimulation Program. We have the Special Education Department, the Ministry of Education, Caribbean Christian Center for the Deaf. We have more than 14 organizations represented in this forum today, and so we really want to thank you and the members of your team for participating. You do have a good day.